All right, so I think we can just get started. First of all, welcome to everybody to our webinar. We're excited to have you here. This is our first geophysics webinar. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We know PDAC is coming up, so thank you. In this presentation, we'll give you a brief introduction into who we are at Sanborn Geophysics, and then we'll talk about the geospatial and geophysical data we can provide, including the data layers we can create from that data. And then we will transition into the application of these geospatial and geophysical data layers, demonstrating how they can be used as depth slices or vertical slices for a number of different applications, like presenting to an audience like we are today, or producing mineral exploration targets. And then, of course, we'll show you some examples. So before we get into it, I just wanted to speak briefly about who we are at Sanborn Geophysics. We are the geophysics division of the Sanborn Map Company. Established in 1866, Sanborn Map Company has been a pioneer of mapping ever since. We're committed to the advancement in technologies and growth. And in 2024, Sanborn Map Company expanded to create a geophysics division through the purchase of assets of Nuvia Dynamics and established Sanborn Geophysics. We focus on geophysical surveys and equipment sales, adding to Sanborn Map Company's extensive repertoire. And before we get further into the webinar, I did want to point out some housekeeping. There is a chat. You are welcome to leave comments, or also a Q&A area where you can leave your questions. And for the flow of our webinar, we will get to them all in the end. So feel free to use both of those boxes. So I am one of your co-hosts today. My name is Betka Ondercova, and I've studied geophysics at the University of Toronto. I did both my bachelor's and master's there. My thesis work included multi-parameter analysis of geophysical data, which you'll get to see a little bit of later on in the presentation. And I've worked in the geophysics industry ever since for a total of 4 years with experience in both consulting and geophysical data processing before joining Sanborn Geophysics. And now I'll introduce my co-host, Kevin Killin, and he'll introduce himself and start off our presentation.
Thanks, Becca. Okay, my name is Kevin Killin. I've been in the industry for about 39 years. I graduated from the University of Western Ontario, and I've been active ever since. So what we want to do today is talk about geospatial analysis of layers, and let's first consider exactly what geospatial data is. So all georeference data, including geophysics, geochemistry, and even geological samples, are geospatial data as properly defined. Each data point is unique, and it has properties which are unique to a specific geographic location with an associated X, Y, and Z. And we can consider geophysics as a geospatial data set for the rest of the webinar. In the case of monitoring or time-lapse surveys, we also have a time as another reference point for the data. So although the precision of our geospatial data has increased dramatically over the years, it's important not to forget or negate any of your archive data or even paper maps. They can always be relevant, and as projects mature, they can be used. So let's consider the life of a mining project, or what we like to call the mining cycle. So the mining cycle can be described with basically 3 main overlapping focuses. Excuse me. So we have exploration and development with expansion, and then finally the reclamation and potentially a monitoring phase. Geospatial data are collected and used at each stage for different purposes. Some data can be used for multiple purposes at different stages as well. So data collected at individual phases can be potentially used in the future. An example is that near surface geophysics, so say lidar, hyperspectral data, can be used not only in the exploration phase, but also in the reclamation and monitoring phases. The initial data establishes a baseline, and it has an exploration value as well. So geophysics and geospatial layering is at the heart of the mining cycle. So now let's talk about geospatial layers and using them to analyze area of interest. It's important to choose appropriate layers for specific goals. Now we come to our onion. Layers of an onion, they're semi-transparent, but they're distinct. They vary in thickness and in color. We have the skin of an onion, which is dry and crispy, and we can peel them apart and we can look at them individually, or we can put them together and create the whole onion again. So in essence, this is what we can do with our geospatial data. So our first layer is the surface or the environment, the biosphere with everything. So in the biosphere, we have things like topography, infrastructure, vegetation. The next layers that we have in the near surface, say up to about 250 meters, is useful for, or geophysics is useful for location of, say, minerals, for groundwater mapping, aquifer delineation, looking for contamination in water or even in pipelines, and finding various types of buried infrastructure. Deep exploration or deep layers, for example, are where studies are deeper than 250 meters and go down to even kilometers from the surface. And that's primarily for minerals and deep earth structures, earthquakes, etc. So layers from geophysics, magnetics, electromagnetics can be used at all levels to provide information and produce a whole picture in any area of interest. So the layers are typically referenced to a surface layer, which can be roughly defined by a land survey, or even better defined during a geophysical survey by creating a pseudo-topography map, or even best defined by a lidar survey where we can get very detailed surface layers. So the surface layers can also be described by geological maps, whether they're new or old. Legacy maps can be very useful, and new maps are absolutely wonderful when properly geo-referenced. So take the time to properly geo-reference your data and to check them. Remember that a latitude and a longitude are not just a latitude and longitude. It does depend on the spheroid. There's many things that it depends on. You need to be very, very careful with your georeferencing. So take time. The environmental and infrastructure information that you can get from LiDAR is also very useful. And geophysics, such as radiometric data and hyperspectral imaging, can also be combined to define the surface and the near surface in areas of interest. Hyperspectral is becoming more and more available and can distinguish mineralization as well as any kind of disturbances in vegetation. So Sanborn collects layers. So Sanborn has a wide range of capabilities. We collect LiDAR, photon counting LiDAR, which is our new avalanche product. We also collect orthophotography and data for creating digital twins, delineating infrastructure, and we also are early adopters of hyperspectral data analysis with access to a number of different sources. We have a fleet of aircraft with a home base in Colorado as well. There's 19 aircraft in our fleet. They're all purpose outfitted to provide a wide range of options for GIS layer collection. So as you can imagine, the resources required for processing all the data that we can collect is huge. And we have a data center with over 11,500 cores and over 20 petabytes of storage. So we have an ability to tackle the largest projects and the largest data sets with the most challenging computing problems. Just an example of some of the versatility of LiDAR. So I've got 4 examples of lidar products here. Intensity images can be used to tell the overall differences in the reflective contrast of an area, which really helps to highlight different aspects of vegetation or overburden coverage. Digital elevation models, which we're all familiar with through geophysics, can essentially see through the vegetation with lidar, and you get a very clear image of the terrain. So this detailed terrain model can be produced and used for hydrographic modeling as an example. LiDAR can also be used to get colorized point clouds, which show infrastructure and vegetation as well. There we go, that was a slow transition. So here's an example of a small area with vegetation and infrastructure that obscures the terrain. So this could be analogous to the start of a project. I just wanted to illustrate what we can do with LiDAR. So the vegetation and infrastructure can be essentially removed from this image, and a detailed terrain model can be revealed. So collection of LiDAR early in any project can be very beneficial in planning and in planning the ground use of your area, infrastructure planning, volumetric analysis. LiDAR can also be useful in reclamation efforts later at the end of the mining cycle or your exploration project. So Betka is going to take over now and talk more about some of the geophysical layers. Betka?
Thank you, Kevin. So just before we get into the geophysics, if there's anyone here that's joining us from a little bit of a different background and may not fully understand what geophysics is or what it does, we've simplified it here. Geophysics is the study of the Earth using the application of physical principles. We can investigate the subsurface of the Earth by collecting data using different geophysical sensors to determine the different physical properties in the subsurface. It is essentially like an X-ray of the Earth. Some of the greatest benefits of geophysics is that it's non-invasive, which means we can do these surveys without leaving an environmental trace, specifically here at Sanborn, where we do aerial surveys. Geophysics can also see through some of the top layers and give you information at a deeper depth. The different physical properties we study here at Sanborn include magnetics, gamma ray spectrometry, and time domain electromagnetics. And in this schematic here, we have one of our Sanborn geophysics airplanes doing a survey. And as they go over an anomaly with a different physical property, which in this case would be the ore body, we'll get a change in response. And that will indicate that there's an anomaly and there's something there that we can look for. So like the airplane in the schematic, Sanborn has fixed wing platforms, and we have multiple fixed wing aircraft outfitted for geophysics surveys. Each aircraft has a triaxial configuration with magnetic sensors on each wingtip and in a tail boom. The aircrafts are also equipped with AGRS spectrometers, which are advanced gamma ray spectrometers for radiometric data collection. There are 32 liters down and 8 liters upward looking in each plane. We have the ability to collect spectral data from 512 channels to all the way up to 2048 channels, and this is adjustable. For the 2025 season, we will be operating 2 Navajo aircrafts and a Cessna Caravan 208 and have projects on the go with the USGS in South Dakota and for the Newfoundland Geological Survey. And for these survey products, we can also identify derivative products from the data we collect. So the advantages of the fixed wing surveys are that Sanborn owns and maintains the large fleet of aircraft, allowing us to quickly mobilize in areas in North America. It also allows for flexible project planning and results in a lower mobilization cost for our clients. Fixed wing surveys are suitable for most areas of interest and mainly are most beneficial for mid to large range areas because of their high acquisition rate over large areas. This makes them the most cost-effective option. Regional fixed-wing magnetic and radiometric surveys give information over large areas and great depths. Magnetic data layers are useful to map infrastructure, geology, alteration, and also for lineament analysis. Different layers can be derived directly from the measured total magnetic intensity using various algorithms. Derivative layers are easily produced for lineament analysis, like for the detection of faults and contacts. The data we collect can also be modeled using various programs to provide subsurface information to great depths. The image on the slide here shows the subsurface approximately to 4 kilometers. From these kinds of blocks, we can extract horizontal layers at different depths or even vertical sections for cross sections. Detailed magnetic surveys can also be done in tight line spacings for more detailed analysis, depending on your target and survey goals. Radiometric data is essentially used in 3 main areas. These include natural isotope mapping, contamination mapping and monitoring, and nuclear cleanup mapping. In this slide, we show radiometric data as a ternary image, with potassium and red being the dominant color. The data here were analyzed to characterize soil properties. As a result of this analysis, we can see that the potassium is very high in the drainage within the area, predominantly in the south. This is the potassium in the fertilizer being transported towards the sea. There are algae plumes in the area that might be enhanced by the presence of this potassium. And as an example of nuclear cleanup and mapping, nuclear cleanup mapping was demonstrated by a survey in 1990 in northern England after the Chernobyl accident resulted in contamination with high levels of CS 137 and 134 all the way to the United Kingdom due to the prevailing winds at the time. In order to understand the impact, a helicopter survey was done to map the contamination plumes and the CS levels and determine next steps for agriculture and farming in the areas. Alternatively to fixed wing, we have also a helicopter platform. The typical configuration for helicopters allows for the simultaneous collection of time domain electromagnetic data and magnetic data for mineral exploration. Sanborn can also employ helicopters for magnetic data only, or magnetics and radiometrics, or even a gradient magnetics. We're adaptable, and you can talk to us about anything you need. The advantages of a helicopter survey are that data can be collected in remote areas and there's no need for an airport. The helicopter surveys are usually lower and slower than a fixed wing, resulting in denser data sets. The Sanborn time domain system has a competitive advantage as well. It is a small loop with a powerful transmitter and the depth. However, the depth of investigation is still similar to the competitors. The small loop is also rigid and does not deform during flight, and it makes it stable and is easier to control in rough terrain, resulting in a clean subsurface picture. The clean electromagnetic data gives us a view into the first 450 to 500 meters of the near surface. It can be used in mining geophysics to locate subsurface conductors or resistors, depending on the target, and the data can also be used by environmental geophysicists or hydrologists for aquifer mapping or mapping of aquatarts. The system is also good for locating buried or legacy infrastructure, such as wells and abandoned pipelines. The exploration data can be used for establishing environmental baselines prior to mine development as well. So now that you know what layers we collect, we'll go back and get into the combining of these layers.
Okay, so now we're going to talk some more about combining all the geospatial data layers. And this is the process of using the positional information to create useful products for different purposes, independent of the data type. We can do this visually as well as creating unique products with a combination of different layers for specific purposes. Again, as I've stated before, it's very important to ensure that your coordinate systems are correct. It's worth a double check, not only for the X and Y positions, but for the Z positions, as they can vary on what was asked for during the collection phase. Your data set or an archive data set may have a radar altitude, a GPS altitude, barometric altitude, and the subsurface Z levels could be an elevation or it could be a depth from the surface. So use caution when you're georeferencing your data sets. One of the important things to really ask yourself is, what do you want to achieve from this process? So just combining everything at once can be useful, but however, doing that, I mean, it can just be cluttered and it can distract you from the actual goal. So, are we looking for a pretty map? Are we looking to highlight a certain GIS feature? Are we trying to which we will show examples of later. So answering this question yourself will help you decide what layers or derivative products or presentation are best suited to help solve your puzzle. So different types of layers might effectively be used to generate better results for any of the different goals. So let's have a look at some of the examples now. So I want to thank, first off, I want to thank Silver Grail Resources for the use of this example. This is a survey in Western BC that was flown as part of a cobalt exploration play, where they were doing geological mapping of some new claims. They did geological mapping, this geophysical survey, and geochemistry data were being collected. So in this particular presentation, there is topography as contours over the magnetic data, and then this was combined with the streams and geochemical data. The claimed data were shown as well, and gravel access roads are shown. These were all pulled off of legacy data sets, and the primary aim was just of the presentation was promoting and reporting of the work being done in the area. As the project has matured, there's other data sets and other products that have been created, and different data has been processed to infer possible sources for the cobalt anomalies. So these are still being used for their exploration. This survey data set was done for Kessel Run Resources, and I would like to thank them for the use of their data. The data set is surrounded on three sides by other recent geophysical surveys. The survey was about approximately 500 line kilometers. So this was a TDEM mag survey, and it was of high quality, where we got good data results down to approximately 450 meters. Data set was fully integrated with the surrounding data that was done by other geophysical firms, and advanced processing was done. Magnetic data shows that the general structure of the area trends in a northeast-southwest area. The magnetic high trend is basically a mineralized trend. The Uranian gold mine is situated at the edge of that trend, and the EM data shows the conductive trends that are related to the magnetics. And we'll look at this in both profile grid forms. We'll look at some sections of the data. So the last slide showed the layers in plan format. And this slide shows the data layers in section format. So these are depth sections, which are also vertical layers if you want to think about them like that. These are shown for the conductivity, chargeability, and the inverted magnetic inline component of the total magnetic intensity. This was done using an MVI inversion, magnetic inversion. So here we can see the unknown deep conductor on the left at approximately 175 meters, along with a known graphitic conductor in the center of the profile, which extends to 400 plus meters. And the mineralization is found adjacent to the graphitic conductor and is a chargeable magnetic conductor. Okay, the data can also be viewed differently in order to choose the targets, which we will see here. So now this is a perspective view of the model data. So again, the data layers are being viewed in another reference frame. For the reference to the last slide, the depth section is shown in the image, and the planned depth slice at the bottom is roughly 450 meters in depth, and it still shows the conductors that trend to the northeast southwest. The yellow isobody shows conductivity that is greater than 0.3 Siemens per meter, and we can see the graphitic conductor very clearly. Note that the isolated bodies, note the isolated bodies that are circled. All right, these are the actual targets that have been chosen. So the gray isobody shows the inline magnetic vector high amplitudes, and the yellow, there's a correlation with the conductive bodies as well. So the isobodies in perspective view are very useful for target generation and location. Note the new targets are where the intersection of the isobodies is found, which clearly discriminates these targets are different than the graphitic conductors. So the unknown conductor on the left is still an interesting target. However, it's low priority as it doesn't have a magnetic signature. So this is another example of combining data in different views in different ways and colors so that we can get different products for a different, solving a different goal. So ternary products have been around in use in radiometric data analysis for a very long time. However, this does show or just serve as an illustration of the thought process that is going to go into the creation of more advanced products from the GIS data. So this is a windowed portion of a large fixed wing survey. This is on only about 5,000 line kilometers of it. As we can see in the slide, the potassium map is shown on the left, and we can see that there's some high potassium throughout the area. And potassium is the main component of many different rock types. So what we can see here is that using the ternary maps in a radiometric survey, we have similar responses of the potassium in the potassium map, but as we use the different ternary presentation on the process data, we can see that there's a different composition of rock on the westernmost and easternmost sides of the area. So using the potassium only to discriminate the rock types would have led to a false conclusion. And for that matter, using any single layer to discriminate complex problems can be misleading. So what we're going to talk about next is generating a pseudo-geology map. So we're going to talk about the use of a large modern geophysical survey in the production of a pseudo-geology map, along with some old 1969 geology maps that were created from sparse outcrops in the area. So the whole area is a sparse outcrop. It's arid, and you can see that pretty much from the satellite base. The geology is fairly complex. We have alkaline intrusives, feldspathic, granulates, basalts, and arcosic sediments in various ages. So the old geology map has some latitude and longitude lines on it. So we use this to first georeference the geology and get a digital representation of the geological map. But it took a number of attempts to actually get the data to where it belonged on the Earth because the details of the latitude and longitude were unknown. We had to determine what spheroid was used and then treat that accordingly to match all the geophysics. So how do we create the pseudo-geological map? Well, first, all the data was gathered and we processed each layer and checked to ensure that there's no outliers in the data itself. So then we rechecked all of the coordinates for all of the data to be used. The geology was georeferenced, as I've discussed, and then it was cross-checked with topographic maps and recent topography, even put into Google Earth to see whether the topography that we had from the historical maps actually matched things within Google Earth as well. So we did a lot to make sure that everything was georeferenced properly. And then we took the geophysical data and we calculated all of the different kinds of possible derivative products for the magnetic data and also the radiometric data. So we did gradients and tilt derivatives, calculated them all. Now that we have all this data, what do we do with it? So we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of layers, but how do we come up with a geological map that actually makes sense? So do we throw everything all at the same time? Is it a good thing just to use everything? No. No. Keep in mind that the output is only going to be as good as your input data. So if you don't know what you're inputting or you don't know what the combination of things that you're inputting is going to give you, you're not going to get anything reasonable. You've only got a limited area to ground truth with your data. So start slowly. So our goal being to create a pseudo-geology map, what we did is we had to explore what geophysical data best delineated our geology. So do we use the derivatives or do we use the single or radiometric channels? What do we do? So we pre-processed the data and we looked visually for correlations between the data, such as the magnetics and the radiometrics, without any derivatives. And then we had to decide, well, how much data do we use? Do we need to use a data set that is defined at 20 meters? Or do we start at 100 meters or 200 meters for our pseudo-geological or regional pseudo-geological map? There's no sense in getting a lot of different noise input into our data as well. So we didn't want any outliers or smaller features to skew the data, and we went with larger grid cell size. And then we combined the layers slowly. So we started with 2 layers, and we worked with the geology and first the magnetics. And we tried the different magnetic products to find out which ones would best delineate the edges, or could we get a better look using the total magnetic intensity, the TMI. And then we moved on when we had meaningful results, and we added in other layers. So we added in the radiometric layers. We tried the individual radiometric layers. We found that actually using the ternary product worked very well. But what we didn't want to do was start throwing in all of the layers and then overweight our data with one physical property. So if we threw in all of the derivative products of the mag, for example, the data would have been very heavily weighted in terms of delineating the mag. So there is a lot of different combinations. that we used, and we also tried a number of different algorithms to do our clustering. So there's different clustering types out there as well. You can use k-means clustering, random forest. There's spectral clustering techniques. There's other AI techniques as well that you can use to put large data sets together and look for correlation. So once we had gone through this process and basically tried to minimize the number of fields that we put in, we came out with 4 actual zones. Okay, and each color had its own properties. And we came up with a color scheme that in the left-hand image shows the pseudogeology of the northern area. We then took the data for the rest of the survey and calculated the exact same clusters based on that geophysical data, and we were able to produce a regional geologic map. There's actually other geology throughout the area, and that is being followed up at this time to ground truth the results. So with that, this is also scalable to project size areas. And Betka is going to now present another area that she's very familiar with.
Thank you, Kevin. Just a friendly reminder that we will answer all questions at the end of our presentation. But similar to Kevin's geologic mapping, I did a project for my master's thesis. And this is a perfect example of this sort of layer analysis. Project, as mentioned, was completed for my thesis at the University of Toronto from September 2019 to September 2020. Just want to make sure that we are back online. But slightly, the timeline and the goals of the project were slightly adjusted to because of the 2020 COVID fallout. And so there were restrictions on follow-up due to that. So the study area for this project was in Ash Creek, New Brunswick, and is an exploration site, as well as a site used for several student projects, including my own. And here you can see a map of the geology in the area and where it's located in New Brunswick. So for this project, we had several superficial and subsurface data sets available, including the ones listed here in our little block. For this project, we took a simple visual approach, and we used a classic ternary RGB color scheme, which is well suited to illustrate the wide range of multi-parameter relationships, in particular clustering and extreme values. It is similar to that used in radiometrics. The most significant advantage of the RGB color scheme is a smooth color distribution, resulting in the fact that we can constrain our colors with petrophysical data and identify the most probable present lithologies from our petrophysics rulebook. So this petrophysics rulebook was created because we had an extensive petrophysical database developed from the drill core of the exploration that was done in the past. There were several borehole geophysics data and lab studies, which allowed us, and these information allowed us to verify our conclusions that we drew from the geophysical surface maps. When we found the patterns in our surface maps, we were able to look into our petrophysical database and identify the most probable lithologies for each response observed in the geophysical data. For example, if our petrophysical data showed that magnetic susceptibility highs only occurred in fresh basalt, that is what we assumed also for our superficial data. And here are some of the relationships on pictured on the right here. The top one is just a histogram of the different magnetic susceptibility values. And in the middle one, we see the magnetic susceptibilities values also class into different lithologies. The ones that were altered or mineralized had magnetic lows, and those are seen in colored on the left end of the histogram. And only the fresh basalts were able to have magnetic high susceptibilities. And in the last one, we see a relation of the chargeability and resistivity correlation chart, which shows another subset of petrophysical data that was collected and showed that also that the mineralized samples shown in red dots have generally a higher chargeability value, but low resistivity values. So these were the kind of conclusions we used once we had our areas identified. But to get there, we first had to create these visualizations. So the scale of the data, we scaled each data, the parameter was converted into 256 byte scales to ensure consistent ranges. And we first imaged just the chargeability and the resistivity to get this green-blue image, as you can see. And then we moved on to include magnetics. For this study, we chose to include chargeability and resistivity at 23 meters depth to get below the overburden. And then we included one of the derivatives of the magnetic to help us identify more of a structural constraint. Although at first glance, it does seem to be just like a kindergarten painting. Once you have a deeper look, you can identify the patterns, and then we can see where each parameter begins to dominate. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Okay. Upon finding those parameters, then we looked back into the petrophysical data to identify the most probable lithologies based on those relations we identified 2 slides ago. For example, once again, that if the petrophysical data showed that magnetic susceptibilities highs only occurred in fresh basalt, we identified the high magnetic responses to be most probably fresh basalt or similar mafic intrusions. Ultimately, when we applied these geological constraints, our petrophysical database, with our petrophysical database, we were able to delineate probable lithologies present. And here's a sample of some of the rules with the associated colors at the bottom. And then in the top, you could see our pseudo-geology map in the middle from the ternary. And then when you compare it to the area outlined in the third geology map, you see that it goes from 3 lithologies to double that, about 6 in our pseudo-geology map. So the resulting patterns found in our multi-parameter bedrock map helped us identify these new lithologies. So in conclusion, the geospatial layer analysis is a strong tool that can help us achieve many survey goals. In addition to all the surface layers we get from geospatial or geochemical data sets, geophysics can help us understand and see the deeper layers. Ultimately, these can help with understanding what is happening on the surface and what is happening underneath. And with the more layers you have, the better your analysis will be. But as Kevin very much emphasized, it is all about your goals and being critical about what layers we want to include. At Sanborn, we do have a one-stop shop here where we can provide you with a number of these layers and data sets in one go. The more data sets you can intelligently layer into your analysis, the more confidently you will be in the results you can deduce from them. Whether your goals are finding our mineral exploration deposits or groundwater or anything in between, we have the layers for you. So thank you once again to all of you for being here today. And a special thanks goes to Kevin for taking the time to prepare the technical content of this presentation. A big thank you to our marketing team, Jordan and Paula, for making this webinar possible, and to all our clients and colleagues who we look forward to seeing at the PDAC. And we look forward to hopefully interacting with a lot of you this field season. And like I mentioned, that if you are at the PDAC, we will be there. So don't be shy and come on by to say hi. And at this point, we will take any questions that you have. Okay, I think we'll do just live answers to questions. So first one from Douglas about putting layers on one another. How is it different from ArcMap?
Okay. Yes, I mean, putting the layer, you can use ArcMap to take any of the geospatial layers and put them together. One of the things that we were talking about here is not necessarily the software, but the concepts of how you use the different layers and how you reference them together. Simply overlaying, for example, magnetic data onto a conductivity image may be useful in a very, very overall way, but when you start to do proper data correlation using artificial intelligence and clustering algorithms, different, and I guess this is kind of answering Ali's question as well. The AI and the machine learning aspect of things is a combination, a way to combine all the data. So we used some proprietary algorithms that we developed, but if you went back and looked at some of the libraries, primarily we used different clustering algorithms to generate the images. And let's see, so did we apply the tools directly? We did convert some of the data to tables, and we did take some of the data to remove outliers and didn't just do it directly from the raster data. In that way, we could remove things that were, for example, when we were creating the regional pseudo-geology map, we didn't want to keep very, very small details in it. So we took outliers out of the data set that were certain amplitudes over a certain basic physical size as well. So it wasn't just choosing a grid cell size, it was actually an amplitude limited product. So I think that's probably answered both questions. Is there any more?
Oh, new question. In any way, will this study help in identifying hydrocarbon reservoirs?
Well, now most hydrocarbon reservoirs are much deeper than the time domain EM that we're talking about, but there are systems, geophysical products out there that will still help identify hydrocarbon reservoirs. And this type of clustering and data analysis definitely can be used in these kinds of studies. We're finding geophysics is being used a lot more in terms of the carbon sequestration areas at this time. So we can, and there are actual lots of gravity data sets out there that can be used in hydrocarbon exploration as well. So there's one there for you, Beck.
Yes, thank you, Debbie, for your question. That's if there's any papers on the Newfoundland, but this was in New Brunswick. I would like to point out pseudo-geology map available to the public. I never published any official papers. There are just a couple of conference papers that you can find online. Or if you would like, you can contact me directly and I can provide some additional information. So we will give it a few more seconds for any additional questions if there's anything coming in.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions,
Oh, wait.
I think that okay, Becca and I are both available at our email addresses. So it's Killin@sanborn.com or Ondercova@sanborn.com as well. So you can find you'll find us at the PDAC if you want, and we can set up any contact information there as well.
If you don't remember our emails, you can also contact us through our website. So
yes, thank you.
Contact us any way you would like. Thank you once again for being here. And with that, we will sign off. Have a good evening and good week, end of the week.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.